The village of Ibeme and its tyrannical chief. The village of Ibeme was a land of abundance. The earth was rich, and the rivers ran full, bringing life to the green fields and tall palm trees. Farmers tilled the land, and the hunters brought back game, ensuring no one went hungry. But despite the land's wealth, fear clouded the hearts of the villagers, for their leader, Chief Dike, ruled with an iron fist. Chief Dike was a man of great stature. His body was strong, hardened by years of war and conquest. His deep, booming voice could make even the bravest men tremble, and his piercing gaze carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats. To the outside world, he was a respected ruler, but to the people of Ibeme, he was a tyrant. Under his rule, no one dared to challenge his authority. His punishments were swift and merciless. If a man was caught stealing, he would be flogged until his back bled. If a woman spoke against him, she would be banished from the village, never to return. Even children knew to bow their heads in his presence, for Chief Dike had no patience for disobedience. Despite his cruelty, he had a deep obsession with his bloodline. He had 5 daughters, Neka, Adiku, Ifeoma, Kameka, and Oluchi, and 1 son, Obinna. Unlike his father, Obinna was gentle and kind-hearted. He spent his days helping the villagers, tending to the sick, and playing with the children. He was loved by all, yet feared by his father. Chief Dike saw Obinna's kindness as weakness. "You are too soft, boy," he would often say. "A ruler must be feared, not loved." Obinna would lower his head in silence, but deep in his heart, he knew that his father was wrong. The chief's strange love for his daughters. While Chief Dike treated his son with coldness, he had an obsessive love for his daughters. He guarded them like a lion watches over its prey. They were forbidden to speak to the young men of the village. Any man who dared to admire them or ask for their hand in marriage was beaten and driven away. He bathed them himself, even when they were old enough to do it on their own. He dictated what they wore, where they went, and who they could talk to. Many whispered about his unnatural attachment to them, but no one dared to say a word aloud. The daughters, raised in their father's shadow, had inherited his arrogance. They mistreated the villagers, mocking the poor, humiliating the weak, and using their father's name to get whatever they wanted. Only Obinna seemed different from the rest. One evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, a mysterious old woman arrived in the village. She was frail, her back bent with age, but her eyes gleamed with a wisdom that unsettled those who looked too closely. She walked straight to Chief Dike's compound, her presence drawing whispers from the villagers. When she arrived at his doorstep, she did not bow like the others. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "You are cursed, Dike." The seer's warning. Chief Dike's laughter shook the very walls of his compound. "You come into my home, speaking nonsense," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Do you know who I am?" The old woman did not flinch. "I know exactly who you are, Chief Dike," she said. "I have seen what you plan to do, and the spirits of the land have sent me to warn you." The laughter died in Chief Dike's throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. The old woman took a step closer. "You plan to kill your son," she said, her voice like a whisper on the wind. "You wish to keep your daughters for yourself. You think your power will last forever." A heavy silence fell over the compound. The daughters, listening from the shadows, felt a chill run down their spines. Chief Dike's face darkened. "Be careful of the words you speak, old woman," he growled. "You do not know what you say." But the old woman smiled. "The spirits know," she said. "And they have decreed that your end will come from your own blood. If you do not change your ways, your own children will destroy you." Chief Dike stood frozen, his heart pounding. But then, his fury overtook him. "Guards," he roared. 2 warriors rushed forward. "Take this woman away," Chief Dike ordered. Let her never be seen again. The old woman did not fight. As the guards dragged her away, she called out one final warning. Your greed will be your downfall, Dike. Beware. And then she was gone. The curse takes root. That night, Chief Dike sat alone in his hut, the old woman's words echoing in his mind. Your own children will destroy you. His breathing grew heavy. He could not let it happen. He would not let it happen. If his son, Obinna, was the biggest threat to his rule, then there was only one solution. He had to kill him. But it had to be done carefully. If he was too hasty, the villagers might turn against him. No, he had to make it look like an accident. And so, as the moon hung high in the night sky, Chief Dike began to plan the murder of his own son. The curse had begun. A father's darkest intentions. The night air in Ibeme was thick with silence. The villagers, exhausted from their daily toil, had long retreated to their huts. Only the crickets dared to break the stillness, their song whispering through the trees like an omen. Inside his grand compound, Chief Dike sat alone, his mind drowning in dark thoughts. The seer's warning clung to him like a stubborn shadow. Your own children will destroy you. He clenched his fist. No. That will never happen. If the spirits had decreed that Obinna was the key to his downfall, then he would not wait for fate to act, he would act first. He could not let his son live. Obinna was weak. Soft. A disgrace. His kindness made him loved, and love was a dangerous thing, it could turn the people against him. A plan began to form. Chief Dike knew he could not kill his son in plain sight. The villagers already whispered about his cruelty, and his daughters, for all their arrogance, might not remain loyal if they believed he had turned against his own blood. He needed an accident. Something swift. Something no one could question. His eyes darted to the far end of his compound, where the deep, forbidden well sat covered by thick vines. No one dared go near it, for it was said that long ago, the spirits of the drowned lurked beneath its black waters. That would do. Tomorrow, Obinna would fall in. And no one would ever question why. A brother, a sister, and a whispered warning. At dawn, Obinna awoke to a strange feeling, as though the very air around him had changed. The light filtering through his window seemed darker, as though something unseen lurked beyond. He shook off the feeling and stepped out of his hut, making his way toward the village fields. His father had ordered him to inspect the new farmlands near the old well, and though it felt strange, he would obey. As he walked, a voice called out from behind. Brother. He turned. It was Ifeoma, his second eldest sister, her expression unreadable. Unlike their other sisters, Ifeoma had never mistreated the villagers. She had never spoken cruelly, never boasted about their father's power. She had always been quiet. Watchful. She stepped closer. Something is wrong, she whispered. Obinna frowned. His sister never whispered. What do you mean? He asked. Ifeoma glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. Father has been speaking to the warriors. He has been planning something, but he will not tell me what. And now, suddenly, he sends you to the old well. She shook her head. I do not trust it. A chill ran through Obinna's bones. His father never sent him anywhere alone. You think this is a trap? He asked, his voice steady but cold. Ifeoma exhaled sharply. I think if you go to that well, you will not return. Obinna swallowed hard. He had always known that his father despised him, but mother. Why are you telling me this? He asked, studying her face. For the first time, Ifeoma looked away. She was afraid. Because I do not wish to see you die. Her words carried a weight that made Obinna's chest tighten. He nodded once, a silent understanding passing between them. I will be careful, he said. Ifeoma reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small carved amulet. "Take this," she murmured, pressing it into his palm. "It belonged to our mother's mother. It is said to protect against spirits." Obinna hesitated. Their father had forbidden them from keeping anything that belonged to their mother's bloodline. But as Ifeoma's fingers closed around his, he felt a strange warmth seep into his skin. "Thank you," he said softly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward his fate. The Well of the Forsaken. The sun hung high and merciless as Obinna reached the farmlands. The fields stretched wide, but his eyes were locked on the forbidden well at the edge of the clearing. It was deeper than he had imagined. The vines covering it had been recently cut away, as though someone had prepared for his arrival. A pit grew in his stomach. Ifeoma was right. As he stepped forward, he felt another presence nearby. Then, a sudden rustling in the trees. Before he could react, a sharp shove struck him from behind. Obinna stumbled forward, arms flailing. His foot slipped on the slick stones lining the well, and for a moment, he was weightless, tumbling toward the darkness below. But then, his fingers caught the stone edge. His body dangled over the pit, the black water gaping below him. A shadow loomed above him. It was Ikena, his father's most loyal warrior, staring down with cold, empty eyes. "Chief Dike sends his regards," Ikena murmured. Then, he raised his foot to crush Obinna's fingers. The spirits intervened. Obinna braced for death. But the moment Ikena's foot came down, a powerful gust of wind erupted from the well. A howling cry filled the air, like the wails of 1,000 voices. Ikena staggered backward, his face twisting in horror. His mouth opened in a silent scream as a skeletal hand, dripping with black water, shot up from the well and gripped his ankle. The warrior let out a choked gasp. And then, he was yanked downward. With a single, shuddering movement, Ikena vanished into the abyss. Silence fell. Obinna, heart pounding, scrambled back from the edge. His breath came in ragged gasps. The well had claimed the one who had tried to kill him. A shiver ran through his bones. He did not look back. He did not linger. He simply turned and ran. A new enemy awakens. By the time Obinna reached the village, the news had already spread. Ikena was dead. Chief Dike was furious. That night, as the fires burned low, the chief sat in his chamber, his mind dark with rage. "The spirits took my warrior," he muttered. "But they will not take my son." He turned his gaze toward his daughters, the only ones left under his control. "If my son will not be mine," he whispered, "then my daughters shall belong to me forever." A twisted plan took root in his mind. And in the silence of the night, a curse deeper than death began to form. The escape and the spirits of the ancestors. The air in Ibeme was thick with tension. Ikena's death had shaken the village, though none dared to speak of it aloud. The well had been forbidden for generations, said to be a place where the forsaken souls of the ancestors lingered. Now, one of Chief Dike's warriors had been swallowed by it. And the chief's wrath was unlike anything the village had ever seen. Obinna's return and the chief's verdict. Obinna burst into the village, breathless and shaken. He knew he had to tell someone, anyone, what had happened at the well. But when he stepped into the village square, he saw them already gathered. Chief Dike stood in the center. His towering frame was stiff with fury, his eyes like burning embers. Beside him, his 5 daughters stood silent, their faces unreadable. A dozen warriors surrounded him. They were not there to protect him. They were waiting for Obinna. "There you are." Chief Dike's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. Something cold. Something final. "My son," he continued. "The spirits have spoken." Obinna's stomach twisted. "You mean the spirits of the well?" he said, his voice steady. Chief Dike sleep called. A lie is part. The spirits of the ancestors do not claim warriors. They do not drink the blood of the strong. It was you who killed Ikena. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. Some looked uncertain. Others looked fearful. Obinna took a step forward. You sent him to kill me, he said. And the spirits took him instead. His father's expression did not change. You call yourself my son, but you are weak. You have always been weak. And the weak do not rule. Then, Chief Dike raised his hand. Seize him. The warriors moved. Obinna ran. They hunt through the forest. The moment his feet hit the dirt, he knew there was no turning back. The warriors thundered after him, their spears gleaming in the moonlight. He could hear them gaining, their heavy footsteps pounding like drums of war. The trees blurred as he darted between them, his breath ragged. He knew this forest, every root, every hidden path. But his father's warriors were faster, stronger, trained to hunt and kill. A spear whizzed past his ear. I won't make it. Then, a hand grabbed him. Before he could cry out, he was yanked into the hollow of an ancient tree. A shadow pressed close, whispering urgently. Be still. The warriors thundered past. Obinna's heart pounded as he turned to see his savior. It was Ifeoma. The sister's warning. Fool, she hissed. You should have left when I warned you. Obinna struggled for breath. I didn't think he'd try to kill you, she finished bitterly. She pulled something from her robe and pressed it into his hand. A small leather pouch. Take this. Obinna frowned. What is it? Something our mother left behind. Obinna's breath caught. Mother. Ifeoma nodded. Before she died, she told me to keep it hidden. She said that if father ever turned against you, I was to give this to you. Obinna opened the pouch. Inside was a small carved stone, old, smooth, humming with energy. This is a calling stone. Ifeoma's voice was urgent. Go deeper into the forest. Keep moving until you reach the river. When you get there, drop the stone into the water. Obinna's grip tightened. And then, Ifeoma hesitated. Then the ancestors will decide your fate. The river of the ancestors. Obinna ran again, this time toward the river. He could feel the air changing as he ran, thicker, heavier, alive. The whispers of the forest grew louder, the shadows moving strangely. By the time he reached the riverbank, his chest burned, his legs ached. But he didn't stop. He pulled the calling stone from the pouch and dropped it into the water. At first, nothing happened. Then, the river changed. The once still water began to churn, spiraling in impossible directions. The reflection of the moon fractured into 1,000 shifting lights. Then, the spirits rose. Figures emerged from the water, not of flesh, but of mist and shadow. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their whispers curling like smoke. One of them stepped forward. A woman. Obinna's breath caught. Mother. She smiled, her voice like wind in the trees. My son, she whispered. You have finally come. The ancestors speak. The spirits gathered around Obinna, their murmurs weaving into a single voice. Chief Dike has abandoned the ways of his fathers, they intoned. He has defied the balance. He has betrayed blood. Obinna swallowed hard. Then what must I do? His mother's spirit reached forward, placing her ghostly hands on his shoulders. You must return, she said. You must end his rule. Obinna's heart pounded. He will never allow it. Then he must be removed. Obinna stiffened. You are asking me to kill him. The spirit's whispers grew louder. The chief has broken the sacred law. The balance must be restored. The village must be freed. His mother's voice was softer. You are the last son of Ibeme, Obinna. If you do not act, his curse will spread. Obinna closed his eyes. He did not want to kill his father. But deep in his heart, he knew that if he did not act, his father would never stop haunting him. He took a breath. What must I do? His mother smiled. You are not alone, my son. Look behind you. Obinna turned. From the shadows, figures stepped forward. Villagers. Warriors. Men and women who had long suffered under his father's rule. They were waiting. Waiting for him to lead. Obinna clenched his fist. Then we take back Ibeme. And behind him, the warriors of the village bowed. The madness of Chief Dike. The village of Ibeme had always known power. Power in its warriors. Power in its leader. But now, the power had turned against them. Chief Dike's rage was boundless. His son had escaped. His most loyal warrior had been swallowed by the cursed well. His daughter, Ifeoma, had betrayed him. For the first time in his life, Chief Dike felt fear. Not of the spirits. Not of the villagers. But of something deeper. Losing control. A tyrant's desperation. For days, he did not sleep. He paced his compound like a caged beast, barking orders at his warriors. He sent scouts deep into the forest to search for Obinna, but none returned with news. Each night, he stood in the center of the village and cursed the spirits, demanding they return his son. You will not take him from me, he roared. But the spirits did not answer. Instead, strange things began to happen. The crops, once golden and full, began to wither overnight. The river, always clear and strong, turned murky, thick like blood. And the people, they began to disappear. One by one. Silently. The curse begins to take hold. At first, it was the old ones. The elders, who had seen too many seasons, vanished from their huts without a sound. Then, it was the young men, the warriors who had once stood proudly at Chief Dike's side. Their footprints led to the edge of the well. But they did not return. Chief Dike ignored the warnings. This is Obinna's doing, he spat. He brings ruin upon this village. But I will find him. I will end him. His daughters, Nneka, Adiko, Kayameka, Oluchi, began to grow uneasy. Ifeoma had vanished. Obinna was gone. And their father. He was not the man he once was. The madness of a king. One evening, as the sun melted behind the trees, Chief Dike called his daughters to him. He sat upon his carved throne, his powerful frame shrouded in shadow. His daughters knelt before him, obedient, but wary. My children, he said, his voice low, I have had a vision. Nneka, the eldest, swallowed hard. What vision, father? His lips curled into a smile. The gods have spoken to me. They have told me how to end this curse. How to break Obinna's hold over this village. His daughters exchanged a glance. What must be done? Kayameka asked hesitantly. Chief Dike leaned forward. We must become one. Silence fell. Adiko frowned. One. We do not understand. His gaze was sharp. Hungry. The spirits say I must take you as my wives. Their blood ran cold. A daughter's betrayal. For the first time in their lives, Chief Dike's daughters felt fear. Not the fear that came from his punishments. Not the fear of his wrath. This was something deeper. Something unthinkable. Adiko's hands trembled. Father, the spirits would not ask such a thing. Chief Dike's eyes flashed. Are you questioning me? She bit her lip, lowering her head. No, father. But he had seen it. The doubt. The fear. Good, he murmured. The ceremony will begin tomorrow. And with that, he turned and left, his mind already slipping deeper into the madness of his own making. But as soon as he was gone, his daughters turned to each other. We have to run, Oluchi whispered. Where? Kayameka asked. Father controls everything. Adeku's voice was barely a whisper. Not everything. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. She took a breath. We find Ifeoma. We find Obinna. Neka hesitated. And if he catches us? Adeku lifted her chin. Then we die free. The flames of rebellion. That night, as Chief Dike lay in his hut, whispering dark prayers to the spirits, his daughters made their move. They slipped through the shadows, their breath shallow, their steps light. The warriors at the gates were half asleep. They didn't see the figures in the dark. Didn't hear the silent footsteps disappearing into the trees. But someone did. The hunter in the dark. Chief Dike's eyes snapped open. He had been dreaming of power, of ascending beyond mortality. And then, the vision shattered. He could feel it. Something was wrong. He rose, stepping into the night air. His breath came fast. His skin burned. His daughters were gone. A growl rumbled in his chest. They think they can escape me. He turned toward his hut. Inside, waiting in the dark, his last loyal warrior stood. Follow them, Chief Dike hissed. Do not let them reach my son. The warrior bowed. And then, he disappeared into the night. A race against time. Deep in the forest, Adeku and her sisters ran. They did not look back. They did not hesitate. The wind howled around them, the trees whispering warnings of something chasing them. But they did not stop. Because somewhere in the darkness, Obinna was waiting. And if they did not reach him in time, their father would kill them all. The daughter's betrayal and Chief Dike's wrath. The moon hung high above the dense forest, casting pale silver light over the land. The jungle was alive with whispers, the rustling of leaves, the calls of distant animals, the eerie hush of spirits unseen. But for Adeku and her sisters, none of that mattered. They ran. Barefoot, breathless, their bodies scraped by thorns and branches. The night air was thick with sweat and fear, but still, they did not stop. Because behind them, in the darkness, something followed. They could not hear it. They could not see it. But they could feel it. The hunter in the shadows. The last loyal warrior of Chief Dike moved like a ghost. His body was covered in ash, his footsteps silent as he pursued his master's fleeing daughters. He had been given one command. Do not let them reach my son. His eyes flickered through the trees, tracking their movement. They were fast, but he was faster. And soon, he would catch them. A village divided. Back in Ibeme, Chief Dike stood at the center of the village, his rage a living thing. The warriors of Ibeme, those who remained loyal, and those who had begun to doubt him, watched in tense silence. The chief's voice was thick with fury. My daughters have betrayed me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They have gone to join my son. Gasps. Whispers. The division in the village had never been clearer. They think they can escape me. Chief Dike sneered, his voice a low growl. He turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across his warriors. Let me make this clear to all of you. He took a step forward. One of the elder warriors did not bow. Chief Dike's nostrils flared. Do you question my word, Ogana? The elder warrior, once Chief Dike's closest ally, stood his ground. I question nothing, Ogana said. I only wonder if the spirits still walk with you, Dike. A ripple of shock. The village held its breath. For a moment, Chief Dike did not move. Then, in the blink of an eye, his hand flashed, pulling the warrior's own blade from his waist. And before anyone could react, he drove it into Obinna's throat. The warrior staggered, choked, fell, dead. Silence. The villagers watched in horror. But Chief Dike, he smiled. The spirits walk with me. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The sisters' last stand. By the time Adeko and her sisters reached the clearing, their bodies were shaking with exhaustion. The jungle thinned, revealing a small riverbank. And standing at its edge, Obinna. Their brother turned, his eyes widening. Sisters. Adeko collapsed into his arms. Father is coming, she gasped. Ifeoma stepped forward from the shadows. We have to leave now. Obinna's jaw clenched. No. His sisters looked at him, confused. Obinna turned to the warriors standing behind him. The men and women who had once served under Chief Dike. We do not run anymore. The warriors straightened. A fire burned in their eyes. We fight. The arrival of the monster. Then, a sharp rustle in the trees. A shadow moved. And from the darkness, the hunter emerged. The last loyal warrior of Chief Dike. His body painted black with ash, his blade gleaming in the moonlight. His eyes locked onto Obinna. The chief sends his regards. And then, he struck. The battle in the jungle. The first clash was swift. The hunter's blade cut through the air, aiming for Obinna's throat. But Obinna was ready. He ducked, twisting away, grabbing a fallen branch and using it like a staff. The two warriors circled each other. The jungle held its breath. Then, the hunter lunged again. Steel against wood. Strength against skill. The fight was fast, brutal, unforgiving. The hunter was stronger. But Obinna was smarter. He saw the hunter's movements. The way he favored his right leg. The slight delay in his counterattacks. The weakness. The hunter struck high. Obinna dropped low. And then, he swept the warrior's legs out from under him. The hunter crashed to the ground. Obinna was on him in an instant. He pressed his knee into the warrior's chest, his hands tightening around his throat. No more. The hunter struggled. Gasped. And then he was still. The war begins. Obinna stood, breathing hard. His sisters watched in silence. Then, a distant sound. A deep, thunderous sound. Drums. The warriors tensed. Adeko turned, her voice a whisper. He's coming. And as the first war horns rang through the jungle, the final battle for Ibeme began. The return of Obinna and the final battle. The jungle held its breath. The rhythm of war drums rolled through the trees, deep and ominous, shaking the very ground. The animals had fled, the spirits had withdrawn, and the wind whispered one thing: death was coming. And it wore the face of Chief Dike. The arrival of the tyrant. The warriors of Ibeme stood in formation, their weapons ready, their hearts steady. Some were old soldiers who had once marched under Chief Dike's banner. Others were simple hunters, farmers, and fishermen who had suffered under his rule. At the center of them all stood Obinna. His hands gripped a spear, his mind sharp with clarity. Then, the trees parted. And Chief Dike stepped through. He did not come alone. Behind him, warriors, his personal guard, the most loyal and ruthless men of Ibeme. Their bodies were covered in war paint, their eyes hollow with devotion. And then there was Chief Dike himself. His body was wrapped in the skins of leopards, his chest bare, his muscles curled like a panther ready to strike. His face was unreadable. But his eyes burned. He had come to end his son. To reclaim his daughters. to erase all defiance from the world. The jungle was silent. Until Chief Dike spoke. Obinna. His voice was low, steady, filled with contempt. You stand before me with a stolen army. With thieves and cowards. And you think you are strong. Obinna did not waver. I stand before you with the people you have beaten, the people you have crushed beneath your feet. And still, they rise. A flicker of something passed through Chief Dike's expression. Amusement. Disgust. Something darker. Rise. He took a step forward. You do not rise against the king, my son. You kneel. Obinna's grip tightened around his spear. You are no king. The first strike. Chief Dike laughed. Then, he moved. No hesitation. No warning. Like a beast unchained. One moment, he stood still. The next, he had closed the distance, swinging his blade with terrifying speed. Obinna barely dodged in time. The air shook as steel tore through empty space. Then, chaos. The warriors collided. Screams tore through the jungle as the battle began. Blades clashed, spears whistled through the air, arrows ripped into flesh. The warriors of Ibeme fought with fury, with desperation. They fought for freedom. But Chief Dike's men were monsters. They did not fight for honor. They fought for blood. The duel of father and son. Amidst the chaos, only two warriors mattered. Obinna. Chief Dike. Their battle was a storm. Obinna attacked first, his spear flashing toward his father's chest. Chief Dike sidestepped easily. He was faster than Obinna had expected. Then, he countered. Obinna barely blocked a strike, the force nearly knocking the spear from his hands. His father's strength was inhuman. You cannot win, Chief Dike sneered. Obinna gritted his teeth. I don't need to. He ducked under the next attack, rode away, and drove his spear forward. This time, it struck flesh. A shallow cut on Chief Dike's arm. Obinna saw it. For the first time, his father bled. And for the first time, Chief Dike looked surprised. The blood debt. The battle raged around them, but all eyes turned to the duel. The warriors of Ibeme, seeing their leader wound Chief Dike, fought harder. Chief Dike's men began to falter. Chief Dike snarled. You have made a mistake. He lunged. Obinna moved to block, but his father was too fast. The next thing he knew, pain. A blade sank into his shoulder. Obinna staggered back, gasping. His vision blurred. Blood dripped down his arm, warm and thick. Chief Dike stood over him. This is where it ends, son. Obinna fell to one knee. His father raised his blade. But before he could strike, a scream. The curse is fulfilled. It was Adiku. She stood behind their father, a knife in her hands. Chief Dike froze. You. Adiku's hands shook. You said we were yours. That we would be yours forever. She lifted the knife higher. But you were wrong. Then, she drove the blade into his back. Chief Dike stiffened. The jungle fell silent. Adiku stepped back, her face pale. Chief Dike stumbled. Then, he fell to his knees. Blood spread across the earth beneath him. His own blood. You. His voice was barely a whisper. My own flesh. His breath shuddered. The spirit's prophecy had been fulfilled. Your own children will destroy you. And then, Chief Dike fell. The dawn of a new era. The battle was over. The warriors of Ibeme cheered. The tyranny of Chief Dike had ended. Obinna, wounded but alive, rose to his feet. He looked at his sisters, at Adiku, Ifeoma, Neka, Kameka, Oluchi. They were free. For the first time, they were free. He turned to the warriors who had fought by his side. And then, to the village of Ibeme. We will not be ruled by fear. His voice carried through the trees. Not anymore. A roar of approval. The people of Ibeme lifted their weapons in the air. The village had been broken. But now, it would be rebuilt. With honor. With strength. With freedom. And as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, Obinna knew. This was only the beginning. The rise of a new legacy. The sun rose slowly over the village of Ibeme, casting golden light on the bloodstained earth. The tyrant was dead. And for the first time in years, the village breathed. The weight of the past. Obinna stood over his father's lifeless body, his breath ragged, his wounds aching. The man who had ruled with fear, with cruelty, with violence, was gone. And yet, his shadow still loomed. The villagers had gathered in the clearing, staring at their fallen chief. Some wept, not for sorrow, but for the years of suffering they had endured. Some cheered, lifting their weapons in victory. But most stood silent. Because even in death, Chief Dike still frightened them. Obinna turned to face them. "It is over," he said. His voice was strong, but heavy. "We are free." The villagers looked at him. Some nodded. Some bowed. But one voice rose from the crowd. "And what now?" "The burden of leadership." Obinna turned. It was one of the elders, his face wrinkled with age and wisdom. "Chief Dike is gone," the old man said. "But Ibeme is broken. Our crops are dying. Our people are scattered. Our warriors are few." His eyes met Obinna's. "How will you rebuild what he destroyed?" Obinna felt the weight of the question. He had never wanted to lead. He had only wanted freedom. But now, there was no one else. His sisters stepped beside him. Efioma. Adiku. Kayameka. Oluchi. Neko. Their faces were unreadable. For years, they had been the daughters of a monster. Now, they had to choose what came next. "We will not rule as he did," Adiku said softly. Obinna nodded. "We will build something better." The cleansing of the past. The first act of the new Ibeme was to bury the past. Chief Dike's body was not given a king's burial. He was not honored with songs or rituals. Instead, his body was taken to the Forbidden Well. The place where he had tried to kill his own son. Where he had believed he was untouchable. And there they cast him into the abyss. The earth swallowed him. The spirits took him. And his name was never spoken again. The return of the spirits. The moment his body vanished, something changed. The wind shifted. The jungle hummed. The river, which had turned dark and stagnant, began to flow once more. And for the first time in years, the crops in the fields straightened, as if waking from a long slumber. The curse had lifted. The spirits of the land had been watching. And now, they had spoken. Ibeme was theirs once more. A throne left empty. The village turned to Obinna. "You must lead us." The words came from an elder. Then another. Then the entire village knelt. Obinna felt the weight of their gaze. He thought of his father, of the blood that had stained Ibeme for years. He thought of the warriors who had died. Of the mothers who had wept. Of the spirits who had waited. And then, he shook his head. "No ruler will sit on that throne again." Gasps. Murmurs. "Ibeme will not be ruled by one," Obinna said. "It will be ruled by many." The elders lifted their heads. "We will build a council," Efioma spoke. "One where no man holds power alone." For the first time, the people saw not the son of a king, but a leader of a new future. The rebirth of Ibeme. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. The fields bloomed again. The warriors laid down their weapons. And for the first time in generations, the village was at peace. Obinna did not take a throne. But the people followed him anyway. He guided them, not as a king, but as one of them. And with each passing season, Ibeme grew stronger. The final prophecy. One night, as the wind whispered through the village, an old woman walked into the clearing. The same seer who had once warned Chief Dike. She found Obinna sitting beneath the great baobab tree, his eyes watching the stars. She smiled. "I told your father the truth, long ago," she murmured. Obinna looked at her. That his own children would destroy him. The seer nodded. "But I did not tell him the rest." Obinna frowned. "The rest?" The seer leaned forward. "That his son would not only destroy his rule." She touched his forehead gently. "But would rebuild something greater." Obinna felt a warmth spread through him. "You will be remembered, Obinna of Ibeme." She stepped back into the shadows. "Not as a king." She smiled. "But as the one who ended the age of kings." And as the wind carried her away, Obinna smiled. For the first time, he understood. Ibeme had no king. It never needed one. And it never would again.